Hi, this is Chris German. Welcome back to the Apartment Dealer Show. This is where we bring you the resources, tools, strategies, and the network of professionals that can help you in the building of your financial legacy through the investment of multifamily properties. With me today is Mr. Dennis Block. Mr. Block has been practicing real estate law for over 4 decades now, and really is a household name when it comes to tenant evictions. Both Dennis and I were together a little less than a month ago now in a live webinar format when the issues with the coronavirus began to explode. The governor at that point had just taken actions to postpone evictions for tenants who could at that time at least prove that they were affected by the virus.
Today, Governor Gavin Newsom announced an executive order banning the enforcement of evictions for tenants affected by the coronavirus in California.
So for tenants through May 31st, there will be no eviction proceedings. There'll be no enforcement as it relates to your inability to pay for COVID-19. It does not preempt any local ordinances that go deeper or farther.
And now things have really gotten out of hand where we have a situation where there can be nearly no evictions at all. So Dennis was kind enough to give us some of his time to bring all of you up to speed. So Dennis, welcome to the show. And first and foremost, I hope you and your family are faring well in this quarantine.
Well, thanks a lot, Chris. Always nice to see you and deal with our wonderful industry. I do want to give a shout out to my son, Brandon, and his wonderful wife, Crystal, who had a baby last night in this pandemic times. Wow. A baby boy, Ethan. So we're pretty joyed about that. If there's anything in this day and time that we can be happy about.
Oh, well, congratulations to you and your son. And so the Block legacy continues.
Yes, it does. And you have a lot of kids yourself.
I do. And it's been interesting with all of us here under one roof, but it makes for a lot of fun. So let's jump in here. So as I mentioned, when we got together last, the governor had made moves, at least to protect those tenants who could prove they had some economic or health experience from the COVID-19 pandemic, and now things have just gotten out of hand. So last week, the Judicial Assembly made a move to postpone all evictions up to 90 days after the governor lifts the stay. What is this all about?
Well, it's truly a surprising event that the Judicial Council could come out with this ruling that basically had the effect of stopping all evictions from either being initiated or for trial dates being set, or for even if you had a judgment and you were attempting to execute on the writ of possession to get possession of the premises. And again, they didn't limit this to a time period where it was involved with COVID-19 virus. It was based on any eviction, both residential and commercial. It's one thing to state that because of the pandemic, we need to make these changes, but unfortunately, they did not limit it to just that area. The Judicial Council, which in my mind exceeded their authority, put a blanket on eviction. So let's go over what they actually did. The first thing they did with regard to landlords' tenants is that regardless in any unlawful detainer action, while they will accept the filing of a lawsuit for unlawful detainer, they will not issue a summons. A summons is part of a lawsuit, and that's what summons the defendant to court. You can't serve a person unless there's a summons issued. So the fact that they're allowing us to file a complaint where there is a lawsuit on file, I do have a case number, but the problem is that I can't really proceed forward with the case until such time as they allow for summonses to be issued. As you properly stated, you can't, they will issue a summons once the pandemic is over and then add another 90 days to the equation. So this is sheer insanity. If you have a case already filed, already served, where a summons has been issued, and you want to take a default, you cannot take a default in order to get a judgment for possession until, again, the governor declares that the pandemic is over, and then another 90 days beyond that. If the tenant has answered the lawsuit and you have requested a trial, all trial dates are off at this moment in time. Trial dates that were previously set are now have to be continued at least 60 days past April 1st. 60 days past April 1st, they can finally issue a trial date. You can imagine the backlog that's going to happen with regard to this. And last but not least, if you already have a judgment, you already have a writ, it's already at the sheriff's office, again, it's going to be another 90 days after the governor declares that the pandemic is over, that the writ can then be issued by the court, and the sheriff would be engaged to be able to do a lockout on this. So we're just seeing a situation where there is not even a realm of that this is being done just for tenants affected by the pandemic. It's against anyone. So we have, for example, cases where the tenant didn't pay rent for December, January, February, and of course not for March and April, but clearly that had nothing to do with the pandemic. Yet in those situations, the landlords who didn't act quick enough find themselves where they're not able to proceed forward with a lawsuit, or even if they were involved in a lawsuit, that they cannot proceed with that lawsuit based on this pandemic. It's truly an overreach by our government. Now, what can happen here? Do tenants need relief? Yes, assuming it's connected to the pandemic. And should we be looking at the landlord as the only basis of solving this problem? And of course that can't be the issue. There's a petition that was started by the Apartment Owners Association, which you can find them on their website, aoausa.com. And what it's asking for is for the politicians to step up and give the tenant rent vouchers. Let our government pay these tenants who allegedly don't have the money because they legitimately lost their job. But to sit and make a blanket order by the Judicial Council that we can't go forward with any unlawful attainder is insane.
So here's the chicken or egg game now. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Governor Gavin Newsom originally had said, okay, if you could prove you were affected in some way, shape, or form, he would protect them for 6 months, or they would have up to 6 months to pay any rent that they had got backlogged on. The mayor of LA said he'd give his tenants up to a year. How do the timelines play? Let's say we do have a tenant who was laid off from work, as many have been throughout the state. So they have proof. They can show you written proof from their employer that, yes, I was laid off. And they're not gonna be able to make the rent. So they have 6 months of which to pay the rent. And then if they don't, then would you start an eviction proceeding, or how do the two work together?
Okay, well, first of all, let me clarify. The governor's order did not give anybody extra time to pay rent. The governor's order basically left it up to individual municipalities and judicial districts to create their own laws. What he said was that if the tenant was causally connected to the COVID virus, and that's the reason why he wasn't paying the rent, then in that situation, you would get an extra 3 months before I could file a default. That was basically it. It wasn't something I was happy with. It didn't tell the tenant, you've got 6 months to pay the rent or 1 year to pay the rent. It just says, hey, I can't take a default for an extra 3 months. But after that, I can get a default judgment entered. I can get a writ issued. But the problem is that at least, I would say 150 cities took the governor up on his request and said, okay, we'll create our own situation. So for example, the city of Los Angeles, if it is COVID related, then the tenants get 1 year to pay the rent. Most other jurisdictions say that if it is COVID related, you'll get 6 months to pay the rent. And that will continue until the governor declares that the pandemic is over. So let's take, for example, that the pandemic is declared over as of June 1st. So if a tenant didn't pay the rent as of March and April and May, that would be 3 months right there. And you would have 1 year in the city of Los Angeles, and I believe also the county of Los Angeles, unincorporated areas of the county of Los Angeles are saying that it's going to take, you get 1 year to pay it back. Now, June, you're supposed to be able to pay the rent because the pandemic is declared over. So the tenant would immediately owe June's rent and July's rent. But then we have to remember that judicial counsel, which states that you can't get a summons issued until 3 months after the governor declares that the pandemic is over. So now let's just do the math. If you didn't pay your rent, let's say for March and April and May, you're now going to have 6 months to 1 year, depending on your jurisdiction, to pay that back. But now the governor states that it's all over as of June 1st. So the tenant doesn't pay you in June or July or in August. So now come September 1st, you can then first file a lawsuit. But remember, you didn't get your rent for March, April, and May. Now, June, July, and August. And then guess what happens on September 1st when the floodgates of the court doors open? You are going to be hit with so many filings that the court system will literally break down. And I'm telling you, it's going to take 6 months to prosecute a case based on the overload of the system before you're finally going to get a tenant out. And that's starting as of September 1. So if you do the math, and it's real simple, landlords are going to take a hit of 1 year's income. You think these tenants are going to pay? No, what they're going to do is they're going to leave, and the landlords aren't going to chase them. So landlords should be looking for at least 1 year's worth of income lost on that apartment based on what our legislators and our judicial system is doing. Now, let's go to the individual municipalities that are just saying, okay, I'm going to give you 6 months to pay it back, which let's pretend the tenant does pay in June when he was supposed to. But for the March and April and May, they didn't. And now you get 6 months in most jurisdictions and 1 year to pay it back. Let me tell you what really that is. That means that our state, our government has conscripted every landlord to become a financial institution, forcing them to give interest-free loans from 6 months to 1 year. Where is that written in our Constitution that we can be forced to become a financial institution loaning money? Now, you tell me which tenant at the end of that 6 month period is going to pay that rent. No one's going to pay it. Either the landlord's going to forgive it or the tenant's going to run away. So when they say, well, we're not forcing tenants or forcing landlords to accept rent-free, but in effect, it is rent-free. They're taking the money out of our pockets. Now, in this interim, in this 1 year that I'm predicting that landlords won't get their rent, does the landlord have to pay for trash? Does the landlord have to pay for sewers? Does the landlord have to pay his property taxes? I didn't see any waiver on that. Does the landlord have to pay his mortgage payments? And what about that tenant who's complaining that there's things wrong with the premises? Is he going to have to make repairs, be it minor or even major repairs, with no income coming in for a year? This is what our legislators have done to us.
For many landlords, obviously, and I've been quizzed on this, do I know of any party that's planning to take a lawsuit to the Supreme Court? That because this in some sense is almost like a taking, if you will, of property.
We have heard we have heard some rumbling that there are some lawsuits in the pike that are going to be filed, that this should have been solved by just like what the federal government's doing with the PPP program, and being a voucher situation where rents are paid to these tenants, but to sit there and put this all on the backs of landlords, that they're the guilty party for what occurred, is insane. So what we're suggesting is if once this comes out, we're going to probably, it'll be on my website, where we're going to be asking for donations, and I'm telling landlords that this is the time to really step up. I do have a plan of what we've been advising our clients to do with regard to this situation which occurred in the court. And I think it's a pretty effective plan. You know, they can write these laws, but we always have to have a way to get around them. And this is my plan, and we've been offering this to our clients, and it has been successful, and this is what our suggestion is. If we know that the failure to pay the rent was not based on COVID-19, for example, the guy is on, as I had a case today, the guy's on a pension and gets Social Security, didn't lose his job, he gets all his income. There is no problem yet. He's talking about not paying the rent. We are starting that case today, but it really had nothing to do with the COVID-19 issue. We have other ones where they hadn't paid the rent since December, and of course they still haven't paid the rent now. So we're actually serving a 3-day notice for rent from December through the end of February, asking them to pay that rent. Okay, so any case where it isn't related, or maybe the guy legitimately lost his job, and definitely you can show us the letter from his employer that he is out of work. But you know, and I know for a fact that this guy's got $300,000 in a bank account. And if that's the case, the fact that he wants to preserve his capital versus paying the rent that he could pay, that's not COVID related in my opinion. So what are we doing? We're serving a 3-day notice. And then, as most people believe, because of the Judicial Council's rules, is that we cannot proceed with a lawsuit. But that's not true. We can proceed with a lawsuit. We can file a lawsuit, and we are filing lawsuits. We will get a case number, and we will have it where a lawsuit has been filed, where this tenant has been sued. Now, they will not issue a summons. I can't legally serve this tenant. But what I can do is I can send a letter to the tenant explaining to the tenant that the tenant has been sued, and there is no such thing as rent forgiveness. We will be seeking this money from you. And again, it's only in cases where we believe that the tenant is not paying the rent and it doesn't have to do with the pandemic. And then what we're saying is we suggest, since there's a lawsuit filed against you, that you contact the landlord and make a deal. So we're seeing a lot of tenants, once they get served, do that and they make a deal. But let's pretend that they don't contact anybody. We have 2 more advantages for filing. Number one is sometimes when tenants are sued, what they do is they file an answer to the lawsuit. If they file an answer to the lawsuit, I can request a trial. Yes, the trial date will be continued, that there's going to be additional time added by the state. It's an extra 60 days, but at least I'm going to get a trial date, and at least the case will proceed the trial, and then I can win this case. If the tenant doesn't answer the lawsuit, there's still an advantage. And the last advantage is that I have a case number. I've already filed this lawsuit. Come September 1, and I'm just using that as an example, when the floodgates open, you're going to have thousands and thousands and thousands of lawsuits filed. They're going to go in order of case number. If I have a case that was filed here in April, and I've got tons of them, my cases are going to go first. So I will be in front of the line of all the other landlords, at least my clients will be, in front of the line for all the other cases that are being filed. So any way you look at it, I'm recommending to landlords out there that if you have a tenant who didn't pay the rent, or maybe it's not on rent, maybe it's on something different, like it was a single family home that you were selling, that you wanted to, that you needed the tenant out. You just served a 60-day notice. Or maybe they're doing some other violations under the rental agreement, having nothing to do with the epidemic. At that point in time, we're going to have a quicker case number. We'll be able to get rid of our cases quicker.
So that sounds like a great plan. And I assumed it made sense to start a paper trail, if you will, and not just sit on your hands. But wait, there's more. So now there's this AB 828 that's being floated and being proposed as law. And the worst component of it is that a judge on their own authority could issue that the rental rate be reduced by 25%. So could you share with our audience, what is this AB 828? Where are they in the process?
Well, I know that it would have to be unconstitutional because it's a taking. So I don't see that has any possibility of ultimately being law. But they are floating it. I know that there's a lot of opposition to it. My guess is that it will not pass. But again, it just shows that a never-ending assault on income property owners who are providing a valuable service for people in our community. But unfortunately, the tone in our government and by a lot of the populace is that, you know, we're the pariah. We're the ones who are creating all the problems.
Obviously, you do a lot of work within LA City, and you do a lot of work within rent-controlled LA City. Are you finding for the month of April 1st, that rent that was due, a significant amount of tenants that didn't pay, or what's your experience?
What I'm hearing is that that there was probably about 35%, 30% of landlords that didn't get their rent in full and then have dropped down. I'm hearing the groundswell now that for the month of May, it's going to be a war out there for landlords, that the tenants realize that they don't have to, in most jurisdictions, submit any proof. All they have to do is say the magic words, pandemic, and that's the reason why, without submitting any proof, they don't understand that lawsuits will be filed and that through the discovery process, we'll be able to figure out really what occurred. But again, we're going to see a big war come May 1st, in my opinion.
Have you seen any blowback from tenants regarding the pandemic of either common amenities like laundry rooms, pools, barbecue areas, essentially something that they would try to accuse the owner that they weren't proactive in preventing the spread of the disease within a particular property?
I haven't heard of that. We have filed, by the way, you can file lawsuits that are based on nuisance. So where somebody is doing a health and safety or dangerous conduct, we've been filing a lot of those types of cases. Even in a case, for example, where it was a straight rent case and quite frankly, the tenant did lose his job. So it was something that we're in the middle of. But yet the tenant is going around the premises and intentionally coughing on subjects and walking up to people. So we've gone in on a ex parte motion, an emergency motion to say that it's health and safety. So if it is health and safety, then we can proceed forward with these evictions. But it's just shocking that this is a blanket effect on all income property owners. Obviously, it's affecting the real estate market in terms of you showing properties. And even, as you know, if you have a tenant-occupied house and the owner wants to sell the house and has sold the house, there's no basis of getting this tenant off the property at this point.
And so with respect to those, though, that if they claim an issue with COVID, you would say just engage an attorney from that point. It's not, in other words, the landlord doesn't have any responsibility to review the proof that they were affected or anything like this.
Well, some jurisdictions, believe it or not, West Hollywood says that, one I know off the top of my head, that the tenant has 30 days to submit proof to the landlord, 30 days. But most jurisdictions are saying that as long as you just say it, that there's, and in Los Angeles specifically says in their bulletin to tenants, you do not have to show proof. I mean, it becomes insanity where they're giving a buy to people without any showing of any proof. Why this should allow tenants to defer their rent and why that should be on the back of landlords is shocking in and of itself. But then to say that it's got to be COVID related, but you don't have to show any proof, it becomes insane. People, of course, can call my office. I have a toll-free number, 1-800-77-EVICT. You can always run by those cases that you have, your individual situations, and we'll give you an opinion. Quite frankly, there's a lot of cases that we're not filing. But for those cases that we can, with the understanding that we can't really get it to conclusion, but we certainly can get a leg up in terms of potentially settling the case, getting a trial date, or at least having a better order in the big line that's going to happen approximately September 1st.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I know the landlords are appreciative of what you've shared today. A lot of people running around saying, hey, no evictions and do nothing, sit on your hands. Obviously, you've given them a game plan, and the game plan is most important. Before we let you go, I talk about the 3 pillars of a financial legacy. And so when in a different setting, we talk about maximizing the properties we currently own, growing our portfolio, preparing for tomorrow. You're a business owner yourself, you're a landlord yourself. So if we go just from the personal perspective, how do people make the best of the situation right now? How do they maximize this time they're being able to stay at home? What do they do with their current holdings to move things in a positive direction? How do they prepare for business when life does return to normal?
You list all your property with Chris German, and then all of your problems will be solved. Is probably the best thing that I would suggest. No, I mean, obviously, it's landlords need to work with their tenants. You got to get some income coming in. You can't do mass evictions on the whole building. Certainly, you can pick and choose, and you need to make deals with your lenders for your mortgage payments. It's interesting that what the government did in terms of giving business owners such as myself relief and loans with regard to payroll and other grants, but nothing really exists that I'm aware of for landlords. They don't necessarily have a big staff, so it's not like they have their staff on hold. So they were putting forth a nothing to support the landlords, and yet the politicians out there and our wonderful judicial council is telling landlords that they can't that they have to wait for deferred rent for 6 months to 1 year. I mean, something has to give here.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Being a landlord myself, you just can't believe what's taken place over the last month here to put this economic issue on the backs of landlords, and hopefully going forward, we'll get better news and someone will go to bat for the landlords. We thank you for going to bat for the landlords in and out of the courtroom every day. Dennis, for those landlords that need to engage your services, again, how would they contact you?
I have a toll-free number. It's 1-800-77-EVICT. That's EVICT. I have a website, which is evict123.com.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for being with us. And I hope all of you viewing today, this was helpful to you. It's helpful in the management of your multifamily properties. Be sure to share any comments with us. Who else would you like us to go out into the marketplace to interview? What other questions on a future date with Dennis would you like us to ask him? And share this video, help other landlords get through these times. Be sure to like our Facebook, follow us on YouTube. We're pumping out, other than Dennis's comment about listing all your properties, we've never ever pitched for a deal in 10 years. Thank you, Dennis, for that. But truly, this is all educational content. We're here to serve. We hope you find it helpful. And always, this is Chris German from the Apartment Dealer wishing you positive cash flow, tenants who behave, and much protection from Uncle Sam, COVID-19, and all the other cronies in Washington. Thank you.